Come on in. Great, how you doing today? Okay, I think we'll begin. If we have anybody else strolling in, they can catch up as we go along. So, welcome back, everyone, after our Christmas vacation. Put this down here a little bit. That didn't go well. Okay, let's begin with our opening verses for this morning. I read from Lamentations. It says, "Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail."
Great is your faithfulness.
I say to myself, the Lord is my portion.
Therefore I will wait for him.
And we pray. Merciful Father, every day our rebellions dare your anger to lash out against us, yet every day your grace covers our sin in Jesus' blood. Great is your faithfulness. Teach us about your compassion today as we read about the mercy you had on the rebellious Israelites. In your name we pray. Amen. So now what we're going to do, my goal, what we're going to look at is this. So for this next section, we're going to be kind of tying in our lessons with where the kids, whether you're in, I believe, in Sunday school and the elementary, I think we're going to kind of tie those all in. So what we're going to do, if you remember last time, we finished up with Joseph, and so we're going to do a fast forward from basically Joseph and working our way up to what we're going to have ending today with the bronze snake. And so we're looking at in our section for today is basically Israel's sin and God's faithfulness. And as we zero in on our in the portions for today, we're really going to take a look at two things. Number one, the Israelites, as they are moving through the land of the desert, the wilderness, everything, and they're moving around for 40 years, and time again, they show, if you want to call it, their disobedience, their unfaithfulness, and how God every single time then takes them back in and forgives them. And the same way, and we can compare that today of think about how many times we will go and be unfaithful to God, and every single time he is faithful to us, and he brings us back in. He lovingly forgives us. He has compassion, his mercy, and that is, every single day in our life, as it was for the 40 years that we're going to take a look at in the Israelites' journey. So as we look at that first section, it says, God led his people out of Egypt through the mighty acts of the 10 plagues. So think about the Israelites were in the land of Egypt for about 450 years. So if you remember, they had the threefold promise. God said, way back to Abraham, I will make you a great nation. When Abraham passed away, when Isaac passed away, when Jacob passed away, they did not have, they were not a great nation by any means. In fact, if you remember, they went down to Egypt with about 70 people in their household. Not exactly a great nation. Through that time, God then separated them from the Egyptians, because the Egyptians, remember, considered the Israelites detestable, so there wasn't going to be that intermarrying back and forth. As we're going to find out, as we look in this section even for today, that there was already, before they even made it to the promised land, there was already starting to have intermarrying and things like that. So God chose to keep them separated for that time. 450 years, God then, they were slaves, they had the hard labor. God said, heard their cries. He said, okay, to Moses, you're going to bring these people out. Moses had a little back and forth discussion with God saying, how can I do this? I'm not the right person for this. God said, yes, you are. and Aaron's going to be your spokesperson, his brother. And so that God then gave him those 10 plagues came down, some on both, some on just the Egyptians, all the way down to the final one where Pharaoh with the plague of the firstborn. And Pharaoh finally said to the Israelites, just get out of here. And remember, they were throwing everything at them, their gold, their silver, their valuables, everything else, and they basically begged them to leave. And as they left, they were you think about the mighty acts that they had just seen, all the 10 plagues coming down, and they were all going out, and they make it to the Red Sea. And as they make it to the Red Sea, immediately they're grumbling. Moses, why did you take us out of this land? We had everything we needed back then. We had food, we had whatever we needed, and now you have taken us out here to die. And so we had the first of the grumbling, so coming through the 10 plagues, the Red Sea. And then from there we had 40 years of wandering. Now, it's not a perfect map, but if you look on the back side, the back page, you can kind of see what people, the most well-known, we don't know exactly how or the path, but we're pretty sure of where that path, that dark, I think yours is in color, mine's in black and white, unfortunately, and I think it's purple, if I remember right, all the way down to the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula. And towards the bottom of that Sinai Peninsula, we have Mount Sinai, the area where God gave the commandments, and also the place, if you look at, there other things happen in that part. You see they came wandering up. You can see where that line kind of went up to Kadesh Barnea. We're going to see that area where where God sent where Moses sent the spies up in that area. They came back, end up wandering some more until all those that are 20 and older have passed away, and eventually they make their way up into the land of Israel. So it's kind of where we're going to be looking at for today, the big expanse of time. And so as we look at this, God already provided that great miracle. Just imagine if you were one of the Israelites that was there and was able to see the parting of the Red Sea. And people try to explain that away of saying, oh, it was just maybe a dry season, or it was just the creek bed area, or it was not any of those, because a dry creek bed area would not have drowned all the Egyptian army and things like that. It would not have made the wheels of the chariots and everything else. This was, so you can imagine how many people have seen the movie, was it the 10 Plagues or Moses? I forgot the exact name of it. And you can see the great effects of the wall of water that was just on either side. And you can just envision the people that were going through there, looking up at the water and saying, why is this able to do this? And let's hurry up and get through this. And the Egyptians were foolish enough to go through there. So they did all that. They're through there. And so now with that, we're going to take a look at Exodus 15. And I'll read most of this coming in, and we'll some will read, some will just paraphrase in here. And so we're in our first stop, shortly after the Red Sea. They've gone through all this. They've seen all this happening. They know that God's going to take care of them. And yet they continue to lapse back and forth. So said Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went to the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in a desert without finding water. So you can kind of see a little bit with that map where we're at. Some of it is labeled on this map, some is not labeled on the map, so you might want to keep on going back and forth or just rip the back off, I don't know. And so you have with that. And so they come with the first. So here's the first grumbling. Moses, number one, we don't have enough water, and the water we have is bitter. It's not good enough for us. And they constantly come back in here. They couldn't drink it. They grumbled against him. What are we to drink? Now, as we look at this all the way through, we have to realize, we don't want to be too hard on the Israelites, because kind of put ourselves in that place. Think about what we have, even today in the United States, and think about everything that we have. Do we ever grumble and complain that, Let's say we're at the drive-thru in McDonald's and it takes us 2 minutes, 3 minutes instead of instantaneous, and they're like, oh, it could take so long to get us food. Or I don't have, look into food, your own pantry at home, I don't have anything to eat today. What are we going to eat? And it's loaded full of stuff, and yet we're still going, I don't know what we're going to do with this. I don't like anything we have in here. And so before we're too hard on them, but we realize too that they are grumbling against God. God is going to provide for them, and God's going to keep them safe, and God's going to bring them, because he said, I'm going to, the second part of that threefold promise was that I am going to give this land to you and your descendants. And if he said he's going to do it, he keeps his promises. He's faithful, and it's going to happen. And so the first time, Moses doesn't realize, obviously, at this point, how many times he's going to have to intercede with God for the people to make sure that God, because God says several times over, I'm just going to destroy them. I've had it with these people. They just don't listen. They just aren't grateful. They just want to constantly grumble and complain. And Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into water, and the water became fit to drink. So there's the first one. And notice how God does this. Something that is very visual. No one would expect that, okay, whatever little water they have there, that you throw a chunk of wood in the water, and instantly you have good water. And I'm guessing when we're talking about water to drink, that it's not just okay water. It's not just water that's like, oh, I guess this will do water. This is water that as they drank from it, going, this is pretty good stuff. This is probably better than what we had over in Egypt even. And so we had that. And, and the thing to remember as God is providing all the way through is they are not going through the best of land. This is not an area of land where, the farmlands are awesome. You have greenery everywhere. You have just rivers and everything else going on and growing and everything you want. This is barren land that they're going through. And to remember that approximately 2 million people are on this journey. In a little while, God will tell Moses and Joshua, and he'll tell them to take a census of the people. So census of the people of 20 years and older is just over 600,000. So you figure if that's just the men that are 20 and older, that are about 600,000, you can kind of expect maybe around 2 million is this group, this caravan that is just going through, and they have to find food and water. Imagine if we had 2 million people even coming through this area and just having to find food for 40 years. And we have a pretty good area of farmland and everything else. They're not stopping to grow crops. They're not saying, okay, let's take a season here and grow some corn. They are taking the food as it's coming along and the water as they find it at that point. So the first part over here at Maram and the Desert of Shur, they came in there. God provided. He said, I told you I'm going to bring you out. I'm going to, and he did. And so we take a look at this. So they continue some more. They're going down the Sinai Peninsula. We continue on to Exodus 16. We now have the Desert of Sin. So once again, the whole Israelite community set out from Elim, came to the Desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. So now they have been traveling for about 2 months, and they're getting a little sick of everything that's going on. They're grumbling and complaining. They're complaining about the food. We don't have enough food. We don't like the food. You only have so much you can bring along with them. When they left, probably had some of the cattle and whatever else. But again, they have 2 million people that are coming through. And they don't have, for instance, refrigerators. They don't have cooling devices. They can't keep the food. So it's a very short time that they have. So now It says, in the desert, the whole community grumbled. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. So here they go. They make the complaint. God in his faithfulness says, I will provide. And once again, he provides. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them to see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other day. So God gave them specific instructions, showing that this is something very specific that he was going to do. This is not something that you're going to find every day. And he told them, okay, you are to gather just enough for that day. That's it. And he talked about, just getting an omer full, okay, and enough for your family. So that's the day's amount. And if you wanted to be lazy, which some of them immediately tried to do and be lazy, he said, well, if it's here, why don't I gather up twice as much? I'm sure it's going to be good for tomorrow. I'm going to gather up twice as much. Then I don't have to do twice as much work and come out tomorrow. I'm just going to, well, no. What happened is the next day, it was all moldy, maggots, everything else. And so if you tried to do more than the day that God said, he gave them specific instructions. But just to show that it is God in charge, God did tell him then that on the sixth day, you gather twice as much because you're not going to be able to gather. It's not going to be there the next day. Exactly. And so he sets it up. Yep.
Would you compare this to the Lord's Prayer? Give us this day our daily bread.
It would be something such as that. God is going to provide, right? And he is going to be in charge of everything, just like we're asking in there, yes, that we're asking him to give it, and he's giving it in his due course, his due time. I'm going to show you that I'm in charge, that I will provide. It's not your work, but as you said, we're asking him to give us our daily bread, and he gives it to us. And so we have in that case, 2 days. And the people that said, oh, now, if it didn't work the other way, where I tried 2 days in a row and it got moldy, well, this time I'm going to just do 1 day, and then tomorrow I'm going to, on the seventh day, I'm going to come out just like every other day. And they go out there and say, there's nothing there. And they have to go hungry because God said, you follow my directions and I will take care of you. And if you don't follow my directions, you're kind of out of luck. And so God provided. And so so Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it is the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against him? And so when we look at this, God not only provided this manna, but we often forget that that along with that we have manna and quail. So God had this manna stuff that has never been seen beforehand. It has never been seen since then, but it was there during the 40 years that they wandered around and everything else. And God made sure that it obviously had some nourishment behind it. It wasn't just, Frosted Flakes or something like that. It was what he needed, what they needed to have the nourishment. And so said Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening, all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. Notice how Moses sets it right where it needs to be. And again, even with that quail, when I would teach Bible history to the kids, I'd often kind of put the perspective in here. Remember, this was a desert area. This was not anything that had a lot of anything. So God was providing, the manna, which they'd never seen before and never will see again. But he also provided the quail. Now, if you kind of put that in perspective, anyone see what a quail is? Just kind of a smaller bird. I don't know, maybe a pheasant, maybe. I think not even probably the size of a pheasant, somewhere in there. It's just a smaller type of thing. So, I was trying to do let's see if I had those numbers. Trying to do some numbers in there. And as we take a look in here, think about what God would have to provide. And we often forget about that. So you figure if there were approximately 2 million. So if there are about 2 million people, let's say that a quail could serve 2 people. So that means that off of there, if they serve 2 people, that means that there are approximately, let's say, 500,000 quail are available every day. Because you just keep on eating. They're there. Now let's say you didn't want quail off of that. So let's say that you said, no, today I'm just a man a day, And so you said, no, let's say half of those people didn't want it. So down to maybe 250,000. 250,000 quail per day. Multiply it by per year. Multiply that by 365. And then once you multiply it by 365, he was providing this for 40 years in a desert. And so you multiply that by 40, and think about all the quail that had to be around there. Probably around 30, 40, 50 million quail God provided. Now, if you were hunters at all, let's say you want to go hunting for pheasant or whatever else, or grouse or things like that, and you try to find anywhere near 250,000 grouse and pheasants and whatever else, you're lucky if you find 3, 4, 5 of them, right? So think about how God really provided for his people more than what we can even imagine when we start putting the numbers together off of here. And so but Moses said, he put it straight to the people. You are not grumbling against me. Okay, they're coming to Moses with their complaints. They're coming to him, and Moses put it square on him. Said, you are not grumbling against me, though. You are grumbling against the Lord. And yet, every single time, once again, God says, I will provide. By faithfulness, I said, this land is going to be yours. You will make it to this land, but you are grumbling against me, not against Moses. So in verse 9, it says, Moses told Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, in the morning you will fill with bread. You know that I'm the Lord. So there's a second one. Third one now. Okay, so we're already, and there are other ones in between here. We took kind of the highlights off of here. So they're moving along. They're moving down the line. They're moving down the shoreline of the Sinai Peninsula, getting close to Mount Sinai. They're over now at Rephidim. And remember, God continues to provide. But they're in a desert. Come to Rephidim, no water. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink, so they quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? So notice Moses puts it right back again, just as he did the last place. You are not quarreling with me, you are quarreling with God. But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, why did you bring us out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst? So notice that same pattern that keeps on coming. They always seem to forget very quickly what it was actually like over in Egypt. They forget that they were doing hard labor. They forget that they were working, probably morning to night, making bricks and roads and whatever else they were building over there. And this was not a cushy lifestyle that they had. This was a lifestyle that, if you remember correctly, they were crying out to the Lord, please get us out of here. We can't take this anymore. We are working, day and night. Get us out of here. And God provided for them and said, here is your person, Moses, along with his sidekick Aaron, his brother, and I'm going to take you out of here. And yet they're forgetting. And their unfaithfulness, well, once again, Moses being that person that is constantly interceding with these people, for these people, with God, Moses cried to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" So notice, it even went so far as, where God told them that, in this last phrase, that the Israelites are saying, "Is God actually here with us? Is he actually with us? Did he desert us? Is he not here?" And all they do is look back at all the other things, that God was with them and there with them. And one thing we haven't even mentioned yet, what was that visible presence that God had with his people of Israel to show that he was there with them on this journey at all times? What were the two things that they had constantly for 40 years? One in the morning and one at night. They went by the cloud and the fire, right? Think about that. They knew they could see God there at all times. There was that cloud that was going there. There was that pillar of fire there. They were there, and all they do is look and see. That was not normal. That was not something that they saw when they were in Egypt. That was not something they would see anywhere else. That was not something that just happened by chance, going, "Wow, why is that cloud always following us?" It wasn't something that they had to wonder about. It was something that they knew that was God there, but yet they continued to go back and question the decisions that God was making for them. And so once again, a very visible sign. God told Moses, "Take that rod that you had, that same one that they did when he went into Pharaoh, and had the different plagues that came out, and they struck the Nile with, and it turned to blood." He said, "Take that staff that you have, and go and just hit a rock. Hit this rock right here, and make sure elders are there so they can see exactly what has happened, that this is not a fluke accident." So Moses takes this staff, and he just hits a rock, and immediately it just starts gushing. And we have to imagine, so if you take a look at this visible thing, remember, there was no water there. There were 2 million people there, and there was enough water that was gushing out of this rock that 2 million people could get water. Now think about that. If you want to take perspective all that, the closest in our area would be, let's say that you have the whole area of, let's say, Milwaukee, Waukesha area. That's got to be, I think if I remember right, it's about 1.6 million, somewhere around over there. Now imagine if they all came to the same drinking hole at one time, and how long that would take. I watch every once in a while. I want to go down to that little rest area by the Rock River, and they have a pump there that must pump some nice water. I've never been to it, but I watch a lot of people filling up their jugs of water, and I just imagine, how long that would take if you put 2 million people to try to keep on pumping that water, even if there was a steady stream coming off of there, and yet these people all had enough and did it obviously at a decent time. If you lined 2 million, all the people in Milwaukee and at Waukesha, and you lined them up in single file and said, "Okay, here it is," by the time that 2 millionth person came through, they're going to be thirsty again because they're in a desert. But yet God provided and said, "You're going to have enough," and did it in due process as went through there as well. And so that was the third time that we're talking about. So God keeps saying now, "You are grumbling with me, not against Moses," and yet his faithfulness doesn't desert him. His faithfulness will forgive, and then he provides every single time. Exodus 32. As we take a look at Exodus 32, the golden calf, the one that one of the most well-known parts of this, of how, the Israelites' unfaithfulness. Here they are. They finally make it down to Mount Sinai. So kind of the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula. And there is the mountain of God. And God tells them to stop. We're going to camp here. And there's going to be some awfully special things happening. And we're not going to go through all of it in here, but this was an amazing thing that is going to happen. And if you were at this time, at that place, it was so awesome that the people actually told Moses to, tell God, we're going to be dead if this continues. They were so afraid of what was all happening with the cloud and the thunder and everything else and the earth shaking and showing that God is saying, I am here at this place. How can you deny that I am at this place? And yet at this very place, we're going to have this very outward sign of rebellion and idolatry. And so when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, so now think about what happened. You kind of took it in the midstream here. They camped there. God told Moses, and he had a couple others going up halfway, and then Moses went all the way up to this mountain. And there God was going to appear to Moses, and he's going to tell him, give him his commands, everything else. And while the people stayed down below and wait for them. And so Moses is up on the mountain. Joshua's somewhere in between there. And when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So now we just stop for a second. Moses has been with them all this time. He has been very visible. It has been very obvious that God is with Moses and God is going to take care of him through Moses. When they needed water, they get water. When they needed, food, they had food. When they needed water that was drinkable, that wasn't bitter, we're going to provide that. Every single time they went through, plus the fact that, the pillar of fire and the cloud and everything else that's going on there, and now God takes him away for about a month and says, follow me, Moses, I got something special. And from there, the people all of a sudden grew impatient and said, what's going on with this guy? We haven't seen him for about a month. What's he doing? Where is he at? Did he die? Did he leave us? Did he say, I had enough of your grumbling and complaining? I don't know. But they did not trust that he was there. And so we take a look at that. We have Aaron answered him, take off your gold earrings. So notice Aaron right away, without thinking twice, starts saying, let's make gods. He doesn't go back, and so at this point, Aaron is guilty as the rest of them, because he didn't stop and say, hey guys, this is a bad idea. Hey, wait a second, Moses is going to be back. I know he's going to be back. He's not going to desert us. God would have told us if he was dead, whatever it might be. So that would have been a logical explanation, but no, he doesn't do that. In his moment of weakness, he then says, okay, everyone, take your gold earrings that your wives, your sons, your daughters are wearing and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what was handed them and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. So here's this gold. Now remember, most of this jewelry, this gold and this silver, was probably from the Egyptians. When the Israelites left Egypt, it talked about how God made their disposition, the Egyptians' disposition to them, saying they were just throwing things at them. They were throwing all of their wealth at them and saying, just get out of our land. Take this as well. Here's our gold. There's our silver. Here's this. Just get out of here and never come back again, because, all this death is around and destruction, and our land is just devastated. So they just, all this is going on there. So they're obviously picking this all up, and they said, okay, off we go with this. Well, a lot of this jewelry probably is that Egyptian jewelry that was thrown at them, saying, okay, here we go. But no longer is it going to be jewelry, because it is now in the shape of a golden calf. And so notice in here, these are your gods that brought you out of Egypt. Once again, remember, they had the visible signs. They had the fire. They had the cloud. They had all the things that God had done for them over and over again. They have the Red Sea still fresh in their mind. This is only a few months from the time they left Egypt. This wasn't years yet. This was just months. And they've already forgotten and said, okay, we're moving on. And so we have that part. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. You see how messed up this is. We're going to build a calf. This is the God, with a small g, this is the God that brought you out of Egypt, this gold thing. And we're also going to build an altar. We're going to do, we'll have some sacrifices and things like that. And we're going to sacrifice to the Lord, as he said. He said, completely messed up. So the next day the people rose early, sacrificed burnt offerings, and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. And as we take a look in a few verses in here, this is one giant, if you call it massive party, I guess would be the best way to describe it, the kindest way to describe it, I should say. And from there, the Lord said to Moses, go down, because your people whom you brought out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I've commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. Which now brings us, as we take a look at this, I'm going to bring out the question. Okay, notice the route that they're taking. And obviously we can't put ourselves in God's position, but we can have guesses. We look at the route that God brought them. And he brought them out of, they went through across the Red Sea. He brought them south, down Sinai. And eventually they're going to work their way north up to Kadesh, and then they work around for, a number of years, 40 years off of there. And then eventually they're going to come up there. There's 2 million people there. If you look at that map, why not just take the straight route and you go straight into Egypt, or straight out of Egypt into the land of Canaan? What might have been, if we're looking at some of this that is happening right now at Sinai, what might have been a reason why God said, you know what? We're not going straight up into there to take the land and occupy it and have you guys live in the houses and everything immediately. We're going to take some time to do this. What might have been a reason why God chose this route instead of the quick, direct route? What did the people still need that they didn't? If they would have went straight into the land and separated out, been away from that group, what might they have continued very easily?
They would have done false worship. They would have intermarried. There would no be one great nation anymore.
Yeah, you have to remember where things are at. Again, this is just one, it may have been, obviously can't put ourselves in God's place, but think about if they were down in Egypt and they got used to a lot of the Egyptian ways, maybe some of the Egyptian gods and practices and things like that, and now they are in their own gods over here. They now are going to take 40 years. Now granted, all these people that are at this place now, most of them anyways, those that are 20 years and older, they're all going to be dead. They're not going to make it. God is going to take this time, and He's going to fashion them and mold them. He's going to show them over and over again, I am your God. I am going to guide you. I'm the person that you should be following and looking after, not these anything else gods that you're going to make. If He would have gone the straight route, okay, 2 months and you're into the new land and off you go, great, have a great life. And they would not have been able to see all these wonderful miracles and strengthening them. Think about all through these hard times, they got to see over and over and over again. Even though they grumbled and complained, they got to see God's wonderful plan. They got to see God's miracles over and over again. Sometimes these were very harsh, as we're going to find out in the last one. Sometimes they're going to include death. Sometimes they're going to include plagues. But yet through it all, God is going to say, I'm going to just bring it, come back to me, and everything is going to be okay. And just like we have over here, that God is going to, as they come through this, they have a lot to learn yet. A lot of spiritual maturing to do yet. And God's going to bring them through the spiritual maturity as they go through the next 40 years. So then, verse 11, Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. Lord, he said, why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and mighty hand? Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all the land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he threatened. Because God said, I'm just going to wipe them out. I'm going to wipe you guys out. Moses, we're starting over with you. And Moses, as he did so often, said, no, don't do this. Remember your promise you made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Remember that promise. And then he even, in other times, he's even going to go back to God and plead with them. Said, what are the other nations going to say? Oh, yeah, you brought them out there just to die? And he goes, let them see your mighty works also. And they are. And as they get up to the end of their 40 years, we look and see how all these nations, whether it's nations of the Amalekites, Moabites, whatever it might be, they are all in complete fear of these people because they have heard, even though there's not social media and everything else like that, they heard what is happening, that these people, millions of people are coming up, and they heard what their God has been doing for them. They knew that there was something special, that if you were going to bring people, 2 million plus people, through a desert, and they're all going to survive and thrive and grow, there is something special going on there. They're going to hear about these things. And so they're also going to hear if, hey, there was these 2 million people there, and oh yeah, God just wiped them out. Yeah, they'd hear about that as well. And it's, okay, now what are they going to say about you? Brought them out to kill them all. And so Moses pleads again, and God listens to him and says, okay, we're good. And so from Sinai they move on. And as they move on, they made it up the land. And they're in your map. We're up in that area of Kadesh, and they're now at the foot. They're at the foot of Canaan. They're ready to enter the land. They have gone through several months, a year or two. They're good, and they can see that land. This is what God promised us. And so from there, Moses said, "Okay, we're going to send spies out." God told him to. And Moses said, "Here you go, one from each of the tribes." Here you go. You're going to go check out the land. You're going to tell us what it's all about. It's a test. Number one, they're going to see what's in there. And number two, it's a test of their faith. So they went in there. And so they went in. They came back. Verse 26, they came back to Moses and Aaron, the whole Israelite community, reported them everything they have. Verse 27, we went into which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey, and here's its fruit. So they went in there. They literally said that fig trees and grapes and everything else, and they brought back branches that were so big that it took 2 people to carry them out of there, and they said, this land is awesome. This is everything you can ever imagine of what we wanted. But the cities are walled, the people are big, they're strong, they have good armies, everything you can imagine, the negative coming in there. And they said, we can't do this. All except for 2 people, Joshua and Caleb. 10 of them said, awesome place, here are the fruits, here's everything we have in there, but it's not going to happen. Why did you bring us so close and we can't do what we needed to do? And again, God's anger burned off of there, and he said, even with verse 30, Caleb tried to go back. Caleb silenced the people. He said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. And again, they said no. And so God's anger is going to burn again. It says they raised their voices and wept aloud. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron again. If only we had died in Egypt in this wilderness. Why bring us all the way to land, only let us fall by the sword, and our wives and children will be taken as plunder? Wouldn't it be better if we go back to Egypt? So notice all this gloom and doom. Still going back to Egypt over here. We should pick a leader and go back to Egypt. And then notice in verse, if we continue in here, the Lord replied, I have forgiven them as you asked. Nevertheless, as surely as I live, and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of those who saw my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their ancestors. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. So God said, here's the punishment. I'm not gonna destroy you. We're going to have 40 years of growth, spiritual maturity time. We're going to bring you through this time. No one that's 20 years and older is going to see this land. If you saw those 10 plagues, chances are you're not going to be able to see the land. If you saw the Red Sea, chances are you're not going to see the land. Any of those things. And he's going to bring through, and he's going to guide them. It says, in this wilderness, every one of you is going to, that grumbled against me, not one of you will enter the land I swore, except for Joshua and Caleb. So for 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you. So that was the punishment coming in off of this. Awfully harsh. 40 years. Even though you're right there at the door. And they said, this is what's going to happen. And so with that being said, coming through, we know that there was a group of them that actually wanted to go and said, well, if that's going to be the case, then we're going to go up into the land ourselves, and we're going to take a small group, and we're going to start going. Well, it didn't go so well. They went up, and they were defeated immediately, and they realized, yep, that wasn't a good idea either. Let's follow what God had, even though it's not going to be a good decision, or it's not going to be, great traveling for 40 years. So they continued after this. So they realized, okay, let's turn back. You can see kind of that line. They're moving a little bit south again. They're wandering around now, however that loop went, and you're going to see some of these things over again. And they came to the desert of Zin this time, no water. And once again, no water. They're going to grumble and complain against Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with them. And why'd you bring us out of this land? Why'd you bring us out of Egypt? Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? And once again, God gives them, the out. He said, Moses, take the staff, speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. So notice what he's supposed to do. Again, very visible. Moses, take the staff you have, go over to this rock, and start talking to it. Sounds rather odd, but okay. So he goes over this rock, and Moses gets mad. He grumbled because they're grumbling and complaining. And notice what it says that he did, verse 11. He raised his arm, and he struck the rock twice with his staff, and water gushed out. So he did something. He hit it, and water gushed out again. But remember, God told him, speak to the rock. He did not tell them to hit the rock this time. Back earlier at that place, he told them to hit the rock. He was very specific, and he said, speak to it. And with that being said, over in verse 12, notice the punishment. Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give you. Now, again, it seems awfully harsh, right? Moses could have complained and said, but it was just a matter of talking versus hitting. What's the big deal? And yet, God says, I need you. You're my leader. You need to follow the directions that I have. Which leads us to their final one in Numbers 21. In Numbers 21, we see that the bronze snake. They traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go to Edom. People grew impatient on the way. They spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no bread, no water, and we detest this miserable food. So now they're getting upset because this manna is not where it needs to be. We're tired of manna. You know, I always kind of said it even to my kids. Pick your most favorite food that you can have, whether that's pizza, whether that is, mac and cheese, I don't know what it is. Picture your favorite food that you had, and now picture you eating it for 40 years every single day. Even if it was your favorite food in the world, after 40 years, you're probably going to grow tired of this. You're like, ugh, I don't want to taste pizza ever again. And yet, God gave us manna, and that's what they had. So God says, okay, you're grumbling, complaining again. I gave you something. I gave you manna. I gave you quail. I gave you water. I gave you everything you need. You have survived all this time. So he said, I'm going to send venomous snakes along them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. People came to Moses and said, we sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away. So Moses prayed to the people. So notice, they wanted God to take the snakes away. Notice what God does, though. God says to Moses, make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live. So Moses made a bronze snake and put it up on a pole, and anyone who was bitten by a snake looked at the bronze snake and they lived. So notice, God did not take the snakes away. God just gave them an out of saying, if you are bitten, go and look at this snake. Again, very visible sign of saying, if the faith is there, you go. Otherwise, you're going, well, that's kind of dumb. How is looking at a bronze snake on a pole going to save me? How is that going to help me out? I'm bitten. I'm hurting. These things are killing people. But if you have faith that God promised that he said, if you do this, then this will happen, those people are going to live. And so we think about what was happening at that point. And so with that being said, we see that last part with that snake on a bronze pole there. We often call that a type of Christ. A type of Christ saying, just as those people looked to that in faith of saying, and looked to that and lived, so that type of Christ saying, when Christ was put on the cross, that looked to him, that faith of that death on the cross, we're able to have that faith and live at that point as well. And if you remember, this same part right here of the bronze snake was then brought in. Think about when Jesus was meeting with Nicodemus, and he kind of used this example off of here. Just as those lifted up by the snake, he kind of brought that into the New Testament as well. So as we take a look at this section in here all the way through, think about these are just the examples we showed off of here, that unfaithfulness, God is still faithful. And God is going to keep his promise. He said, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to give you this land. And then ultimately, the third part of the promise was, all nations on earth will be blessed through you. Namely, Jesus is coming from your line. I'm going to keep your line, and you're going to grow. And the people just had to realize that, God does keep his promises, and God is faithful in all that he is doing. And just as he was faithful those years back with the children of Israel, we think about us too, that no matter what the promises are, he is faithful to us. And there's not been a single promise that he has not kept through all eternity. And he's always going to keep those promises. That's never going to change from there. And it says, the Israelite grumblings continued through their wandering, yet still God's mercies were new every morning. And He continued to love and forgive them the same as He does for us today. Questions or comments at all before we close? Okay, let's close with prayer then. Dear Heavenly Father, you have promised over and over again that you will be with us at all times, through all circumstances. Help us always to remember that promise when things don't always look right, realizing that you are behind it and you are guiding it and you are still in control. Help us always to remember those promises and believe those promises in everything we do. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much.